Good afternoon. I'm your host, Gary Mullen, and thanks for joining us for the second installment of our Cybersecurity Leadership Series. If you joined us last time, you'll remember we made a case for the missing layer, why every CISO needs an OT vCISO. Today, we're going to pick up exactly where that conversation ended and zoom in on a question that becomes very real the moment you accept that first premise. How do you actually show your board what you now know? Not in alert counts, not in patch percentages, not in CVE severity scores, in something they can actually do something with. That's what we mean by executive cyber visibility. And here's the idea I'd like you to hold on to for the next 30 minutes, because everything else builds on this. The goal of cyber reporting is not to inform the board, is to enable a decision. If you walk away from a board meeting and the directors feel informed, but no decision was made, no risk was accepted, no investment improved, and no authority confirmed, the report didn't do its job. It was just data. It wasn't visibility. Today, I'm joined by Terry McCorkle, CEO and founder of PhishCloud, and Chris Weule, Director of Operational Technology, Cyber Fusion, and Strategy at PhishCloud. They're going to walk you through what real executive visibility looks like, what boards are actually asking now, why most dashboards quietly fail at the executive level, and a practical model for turning cyber risk into the kind of business clarity that drives decisions. So let's get started. Terry, Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Gary. I want to start with a piece of good news because we don't always get good news in cybersecurity, and this one's pausing on. Boards are asking better questions than they used to. 5 years ago, the board's questions usually were in the flavor of "Are we secure?", which is fundamentally an unanswerable question. But it was the best that the room could do at the time. Today, in a well-governed organization, the board is asking four very different questions. Are we exposed? What happens if operations stop? How fast can we recover? And what is our real business risk? Notice what's happening here. Each of those is operational. Each of them assumes a breach is possible, and each one is grounded in business outcomes, not technical posture. Uh, that's really the difference in the boards that we've seen from 5 years ago, and it's a meaningful shift.
It's a shift that's driven by a few things. Boards have lived through public incidents now that are beyond the "we trust the security team" and have stopped feeling like a defensible, feeling like that we trust the security team as a defensible posture. Cyber insurance underwriters are asking sharper questions, and the board has picked up on that language. Regulators like the TSA, SEC, NERC have moved cyber from the operational layer into the in the accountability column. So the questions have evolved. Here's the catch, though, and there is some friction in what we want to talk about today. Most cyber reporting didn't evolve at the same time that these boards have gone ahead and leveled up, right? So boards have leveled up, but reporting didn't, which means in a lot of organizations, you have directors asking the right questions and the security team answering totally different ones. Not because anyone is doing anything wrong, but because the formats, the metrics, and the dashboards that we built 10 years ago were built for a different audience. And that's the gap we want to close today. The good news is that once you see it, it's actually really fixable. So here's a question I'd like you to sit with for just a second. What's the difference between a lot of information and good information? Because the dashboards that most executives see today have a lot of information on them. Open most CISO board decks, and you'll find volumes of alerts, patch compliance percentages, mean time to detect, mean time to respond, vulnerability counts by severity, training completion rates. It's exhaustive, it's accurate, and it's most likely the wrong material for that particular audience. Those metrics tell the security team how the security team is doing. They were designed for operational management, and they're great at that. But they were never designed to support an executive level decision.
What executives need from a cyber report is different. They need operational risk. What could stop, slow, or disrupt business? They need financial exposure. So, what is the dollar amount behind the risk? And they need posture trajectory. Are we getting better or worse, and where? And that they just need those decision points for what they decide in those board meetings to help you know, make sure they're making good decisions and when. The phrase we keep coming back to is this: visibility is not volume, visibility is clarity. A dashboard shows you everything, you know, shows you everything and obscures things that matter. A dashboard that shows you four things that you have to act on, that's visibility. And those are very different products.
A useful test, if you want to take one home from today, is pick up your most recent board cyber report. Read it as if you were a director seeing it for the first time. Ask yourself, at the end of this report, do I know what I'm being asked to decide? If the answer is no, then the report is just data. If the answer is yes, the report is visibility. That's the bar we're going to spend the rest of this session talking about how to clear up.
So, why does this gap exist? Why do smart security teams with good tools produce reports that boards can't easily use? It comes down to a missing layer. We're calling it the translation layer. Picture three-layer stacks. At the bottom is the technical layer, the alerts, the tools, the telemetry, and the controls. That's what your security team lives in. And at the top of the decision layer, those choices the boards actually have to make about the risk would have investment, authority, and others. Uh, and in the middle, where the magic happens, is the translation layer. The work of taking the technical reality and converting it into business consequence in language that a non-technical executive can act on. In most organizations, that middle layer is doing heavy lifting of one person's head. So usually the CISO will be the person that's stuck with that. Sometimes the COO, but sometimes nobody, and that's where the report gets handed up and hoped for.
When that translation layer is missing or running within a single person, three things happen. And we see all three of these in the field constantly. First, technical data without context creates a false sense of confidence. The board sees a the decision board sees a green dashboard and assumes risk is low. The security team knows that the dashboard is green because the measured things are green, not because the important things are green. And that's a dangerous gap. Second, the board defaults to trust. Without a way to interrogate the report, directors fall back on, we have good people working on this. That's not governance, it's delegation. And those are different things. Third, when something does go wrong, nobody saw it coming. Not because the data wasn't there, but because the data was never translated. The signal was in the noise, and it was there the whole time. But the fix isn't more tools. It isn't more reports. It's a deliberate designed translation layer built once and then run consistently. It's owned by someone whose job it is to bridge the two worlds between that decision and the operations. And that's the work we want to make visible today.
So if the dashboards aren't speaking the right language, what would the right language be? Is the question. What does the board actually want to know? After enough boardroom conversations, 4 questions surface again and again. And they're worth memorizing because if your reporting answers these 4 cleanly, you've solved most of the visibility problem. Question 1, can production stop? There's not are we vulnerable, but can production stop? Boards think in operational continuity. They want to know if the condition exists for real disruption and not a theoretical one. Question 2, how long would downtime last? Hours, days? The units they care about is duration, because duration is the variable that drives revenue loss, regulatory exposure, and reputational damage. A 4-hour outage is a story. A 4-week outage is a crisis. Boards need to know which one we're potentially dealing with.
Question 3 is, what is the recovery path? Not, do we have a backup? But what is the path? Who calls who? What systems come back in what order? How long is production? How long until production is producing again? Not just until the network is up. The path is what gets the business back, and most security reports stop short of describing it. Question 4 is, who owns that decision? This question catches most CISOs off guard more than any of the others. In a real incident, somebody has to make the call to halt production, to pull a vendor connection, to disclose to a regulator, or to pay or not pay a ransom. The board wants to know whose name is on each of those decisions before the incident happens, not during it.
Right. Yeah, if we look at those 4 questions together and notice what's not there, there's no CVE score, no patch percentage, no control framework reference, none of the technical exposure or posture metrics that most reports deal with today. These are the operational questions, not the security questions, and that's a language shift. The board didn't change topics. They were always asking about the business. What we just got used to answering in a different vocabulary.
I want to give you a simple model that we use a lot because once you use it and once you have it, the reporting problem it starts to organize itself. Think of cyber visibility as a 4-stage pipeline. At stage 1, you have raw data. This is what your tools generate: alerts, logs, scan results, vulnerability counts. All of this is useful data, but it's not really meaningful data. At stage 2, you have risk context. This is where the raw data gets enriched with what it means. An alert on a controller is just an alert until you know what that controller runs within the bottling line. Then it's a risk. Risk is context that turns data into a story. So, stage 3, we have the business impact. This is where risk gets translated into consequence. Production hours at stake, revenue exposure, safety implications. When does that regulatory clock start? This is the layer that most executive reports never reach. And then at stage 4, you have decisions. This is the goal: a report that ends in a decision that the board can make to accept a risk, to fund the mitigation, to escalate an issue, to assign the authority. That's a report that did its job.
Right. The reason this pipeline is useful is it gives diagnostic. Pick up any cyber report and ask yourself, which stage does the report stop at? A lot of security tools stop at stage 1. They show you the data. Newer platforms, anyways, will stop at stage 2, where they show you the risk. The best executive dashboards stop at stage 3, which is business impact. But almost nobody is built to land in stage 4. Almost nobody designs reports to enable decision. That's the leap. And it's not a tooling leap, it's a leadership leap. It requires somebody in the room whose job is to take that impact picture and frame it as a choice for the board to make. When that happens, board meetings get shorter, decisions get clearer, confidence gets higher, not because the news is better, but because the clarity is better. Visibility is the way we mean it today, in the way we mean it today, is what closes the gap from data to decision. Now, let's get more concrete about what stage 3 of the pipeline actually looks like, because business impact is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, and it's worth being specific. In an OT environment, business impact almost always shows up through one of 4 lenses. If you can speak to all 4, you've covered the ground that a board cares about. So lens 1, production impact. Can the line, the grid, the plant, uh, or a well, for example, can the process keep running? Is it the operational core of the business? And for industrial businesses, that operational core is usually the dominant variable. Lens 2 is safety implications. In OT, security and safety aren't separate conversations. It's a compromised controller that can become a safety event. The board needs to know whether a cybersecurity incident could cross into worker safety or environmental incident, because the disclosure obligations and the moral weight of those situations are completely different.
So, lens 3 is regulatory exposure. TSA pipeline directives, NERC SIP, NIS2, SEC disclosure rules, state PUC requirements. Every industrial sector has its own regulatory landscapes. And a cyber event almost always triggers a clock somewhere. Boards want to know which regulators get notified, on what timelines, and what the penalty exposure looks like. Lens 4 is revenue interruption. This is the financial translation. How much revenue is at stake per hour, per day, per week of disruption? Boards translate everything into this eventually. And if you don't bring the number, somebody else's estimate is going to become that working number. And that's almost never what you want.
What's worth noting about these 4 lenses is that each is a bridge. They take a technical reality, a vulnerability, an exposure, an unmonitored system, and connect it to business outcome that the board actually cares about. That bridge work is what an OTV CISO does for the CISO. It's not new information. It's the same information presented in the form an audience can act on. And that small reframe is what unlocks board level conversations that actually go somewhere.
So, if there's one piece of practical advice that we want to hand to you today, it's that uh, the ability to implement and make these changes uh, in the conversations um, costs you nothing. Just match the unit that your audience thinks in. Boards don't think in patch percentages. They don't think in CVSS scores. They don't think in mean time to anything. Boards think in 4 units, and they're consistent across all the industries. Hours of downtime, which is your duration variable, lost production value, which is your revenue variable, safety impact, the human variable, and then regulatory penalties, that compliance and reputational variable. Those are the units you need to be thinking in. If your report uses those units, the board can engage with it. If your report uses different units, then the board has to translate before they can engage. And most of them won't bother. They'll nod, they'll thank you, and then they'll move on to the next agenda item.
Let's give a practical example. Same findings, 2 different ways to present it. Version 1, we have 47 unpatched controllers across 3 production lines with a CVSS score of 7.8. Version 2, we have an exposure on 3 production lines that, if exploited, could halt production for an estimated 12 to 16 hours, with a daily revenue impact of approximately 1.4 million per affected line and a likely TSA notification trigger. Same finding, same severity, same underlying technical reality, but a completely different conversation. Version 1 ends with the board saying thank you. Version 2 ends with the board asking, what do you need from us to mitigate? The difference isn't the data, it's the units.
This is one of the easiest changes a security program can make, and it's one of the highest leveraging. You don't need new tools. You don't need a new team. You need to commit as a discipline to expressing every executive facing finding in business units: hours, dollars, harm, and fines. Once that becomes the house style, the relationship between security and the board changes, not just because trust improves, though it usually does, but because the conversation finally has a shared vocabulary.
I want to share an idea that surprises many people because it's a reframe that it runs counter to how most industries talk about this. Cyber visibility is not a tool. It's not a dashboard, and it's not a report. And it's not a problem. Cyber visibility is governance, and the moment that clicks, it changes how the organization builds the program, because you stop asking what do I need, and you start asking what decisions does my organization need to be ready to make, and is that readiness built? So three components turn data into governance.
First, decision authority mapping. For every category of cyber risk, somebody owns the decision: production halts, vendor disconnections, public disclosure, random posture or ransom posture, uh, insurance notifications. If those decisions aren't pre assigned, you're going to assign them under stress, which is the worst possible time to invent a decision rights model. Second, escalation pathways. When something happens, who hears about it first? Who hears about it second? And what triggers that escalation from first to second? The reason that this matters is that in a real incident, time spent figuring out who to call is time spent with that incident unfolding. Escalation pathways turn minutes into seconds. Third, ownership clarity. Every category of risk has a name attached to it. Not the security team owns it, not IT owns it, but a person, that person's name. The person owns the visibility into that risk and the decision rights for managing it. When ownership is clear, governance gets simple. When ownership is fuzzy, every incident becomes an authority crisis on top of the technical crisis.
Yeah, and what makes this a governance question and not a security question is the failure mode. When security controls fail, you have a security incident. When controls fail, you have an organizational incident. What is most always worse, because it touches reputation, regulatory confidence, customer trust, and board credibility all at once. Boards understand governance failures. They've lived through them in other domains. Uh, Frame cyber visibility as governance infrastructure, not as tooling, and you get a different quality and attention from the room.
One more reframe, because this one trips up even the very experienced CISOs. Compliance is not visibility. These two things get conflated constantly, and it's worth pulling them apart because conflating them creates real risk. Here's the distinction: compliance is past tense. It's evidence that at a particular point in time, against a particular framework, the organization had the right policies, had the right controls, and had the right documentation. It is, by design, a snapshot in time. Visibility is present tense. It's the ability to see right now what your real risk exposure picture looks like across systems that have changed since the last audit, vendors that have connected since the policy was written, threats that emerged since the last assessment. A clean audit is not a substitute for a current picture. They are different artifacts designed for different purposes, and neither one replaces the other.
The frameworks that matter in OT, NERC-CIP, IEC 62443, NIST SP 800-82, and NIST CSF, they're excellent. They give you structure, language, and credible benchmarks, but they're scaffolding. They're not the building. Uh, the mistake we see most often is when an organization builds a strong compliance program and assumes the visibility problem is solved. It isn't. You can fully be NERC-CIP compliant and still not be able to answer the question, those 4 questions the board really wants to hear that we covered earlier. You can pass an IEC 62443 audit and still not know much in which decisions need to have pre-assigned authority. Compliance supports visibility. It does not replace it.
The healthier framing, and the one we coach in every engagement, is compliance keeps you defensible. Visibility keeps you decisive. You need both. They serve different masters. A regulator wants compliance, and a board wants visibility. A CISO running a mature program builds the second on top of the first and treats them as the complementary disciplines that they are. If today is the day that distinction lands cleanly for you, that alone is worth this 30 minutes.
We spent the session talking about visibility in the abstract. I want to leave you with what it actually looks like in practice, because once you've seen it, it's hard to unsee, and it tends to become the model you reach for. What you're looking at on this slide is what we call our executive risk map. 2 axes, likelihood of occurrence on the horizontal, build the business impact on the vertical, and we plot major risk categories of the OT environment as points on the grid. Lower left, low likelihood, low impact. It's routine risk. This belongs to the security team, and the board doesn't need to engage here. The middle band, operational risk, the security team handles that day to day, but the board should be aware of the trend. Upper band, high impact, strategic risk. This is where the board has to be involved. These are the risks that, if realized, would change the company's trajectory. Upper right, high impact, high likelihood, is the immediate board visibility zone. Whatever sits in this quadrant needs to have a name attached to it, a decision waiting on it, and a date on the calendar.
In a real OT environment, the points on this map usually fall along familiar lines. OT production network, typically high impact, and depending on the maturity of the program, anywhere from medium to high likelihood. This is almost always an upper right conversation. Remote vendor access, usually moderate impact, but consistently high likelihood, because vendor connections are often the least monitored attack surface in the environment. Identity systems, those are high impact, with likelihood depending on the maturity of identity governance. Email security, well, that's generally a lower impact on OT heavy operations, but a high likelihood. And frequently, it's your initial vector into the system. The point of the map is not the points themselves. The point is the conversation that these points enable. The board can look at this and ask, what's our plan for stuff that's in the upper right? Who owns those? When are we revisiting who owns that or what belongs in that upper right? That's a board conversation. That's a governance in motion. That's visibility that enables a decision, which is the entire goal that we set out at the start of this particular session. So if anything that we covered today made you pause, if any of those 4 board questions made you wonder whether your current reporting could answer them cleanly, that pause is worth listening to. We do an executive cyber visibility assessment that's designed to surface exactly those questions. It's a structured look at where you are in the 4-stage pipeline, where your reporting lands today, where the translation gap lives in your particular organization, and what a board ready visibility model would look like in your specific environment. There's no proposal on the first call. We listen. It's not a sales process. It's a conversation. Gary, back to you.
All right, Chris and Terry, thank you both. That was a fantastic session, and I know one that many OT leaders out there today are eager to hear. The summary I'll send you home with is that boards are asking better questions than they used to, and that's good news. The reporting most of us inherited isn't built to answer those questions, and that's the gap an OTV CISO closes. Visibility isn't a tool, it's governance. It's the discipline of turning technical reality into business decisions every time on a cadence the board can rely on. If that resonates, the contact information is in the chat. We have about 5 minutes for questions, so we're going to open that up. If you have a question, click on the questions tab in the lower right-hand corner and enter your question there. To get things started, we're going to deal with several questions that we are constantly asked in engagements of this nature. First of all, gentlemen, what does an executive cyber visibility assessment actually deliver? What would I have in hand at the end of that session?
Chris, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll take that. So the idea behind that executive cyber visibility assessment is to understand where you are in deciding on what those pathways are that we talked about. Do you understand if a compromise were to happen within a specific production line or inside of one of your OT environments? Um, what is that downtime? What does it look like to uh, recover from an incident? Not, that we would know directly about any individual compromise, but that if you had a compromise and some particular piece of equipment were to be affected, who gets to make the decisions? Do you already have that in hand? Do you know? Um, Often this brings to light a lot of gaps where people look at understanding where the authorities are for people to provide the decision, and whether or not these recoveries can happen quickly. Like I said earlier when I was talking about, we don't really know, we don't care about the fact that there are backups. That's good. Backups are important. Do you know how to restore a backup? Who gets to go ahead and make that call about when a backup, checkbox? Yep. We know that now is the time to go ahead and do a backup, to restore from that. So we would give you a deliverable that includes known pathways, the current known playbooks, what needs to be improved, and how that translates into those 4 units, time, revenue, harm, and the decision matrix, right? So that's what we would expect out of that cyber visibility assessment.
Okay, great. The next question, we talk about the language being used at the board level. How do you handle a situation where the CISO and the board are using different vocabulary, but neither one of them realizes it?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we found is you really need to get down to helping both sides understand how they speak with the other. Tabletops go a long way in not only exposing gaps, but exposing the differences in, for example, how the OT side of the business handles an incident versus the IT security organization. And it also helps, highlight those areas that a board really wants to understand during an incident. So working through a tabletop situation with an organization a lot of times exposes the different languages that the organization speaks across different silos. And that includes up leveling it to the board so that the board knows what questions to ask, but more importantly, the IT and OT organizations understand how to answer those questions in a relevant and meaningful way.
To kind of continue in that theme, here's a question from one of our attendees today. Are we framing this backwards when we say cybersecurity needs to be translated into business language? Shouldn't security first understand the business deeply enough that security strategy naturally emerges from operational reality instead of needing translation afterward?
It's a good question. And I believe you need to work those types of questions in both directions. You need to understand what is the true business impact and what is it that the board's really going to care about. And you also need to understand what are the technical capabilities of the organization. In the middle of that, where they meet, you understand your visibility as an organization. How do you up level those questions to the board? That's really where the translation starts happening. Again, that translation layer of understanding that you may have the data, but it hasn't necessarily been framed in a way that everybody within the business can act on that. So you actually do need to look at it from both directions and understand exactly where these types of questions can be answered and who's responsible for answering them. So it's defining that matrix within your organization, those procedures you're going to use, the different workflows that you have, and ultimately making sure that everybody gets the information out of that process. So whether it's a board looking at it or a technical organization, you do need to approach it from both directions.
Mhm.
I'd also like to add some framing on that, which is um, the question is, shouldn't security understand the business model? I would turn around and say that um, I expect the board to understand their business model and their business needs and where revenue comes from. I don't expect the security person who's currently trying to answer phishing emails to understand where how much money the bottling line for Coke versus the bottling line for Diet Coke is, right? Which one of those, if it goes down, costs me more money, right? That's not the security person's job, and that's why we have this translation layer, because the person who's on the bottling line, they understand the pieces of equipment, or they understand the security involved in that their specific realm of expertise. And we expect leadership's realm to be in that business model, right? I don't expect the business folks to understand CVSS scores or the vagaries of ladder logic on a PLC. But I do expect that they should know how to make a business decision given a certain amount of information, right? There is a translation between the needs of the board versus what the needs of the operator are.
Super. All right, we're going to take one more question in the interest of time, and I'm going to pick it. Uh, how do you build a decision authority matrix in an organization that's never had one?
Chris, I'll let you jump in first.
Okay. So I would say that we like I was just talking about, right? We expect the board to be able to go ahead and make those types of decisions, but they actually have to have some level of understanding of their environment first. So we talk about um, who gets to go ahead and make the call on whether or not we turn down turn off the bottling plant I was just talking about, right? that business decision authority matrix has to be where we discuss um, if this particular solution or risk were to take place, who gets to make that call? Now, in most OT environments, it is often that the site manager is the person who holds the keys to whether or not they get revenue at their particular site and location. Um, but and I will say that the board has delegated down to that level that the site manager needs to be able to go ahead and make the decisions for how they're going to make money on a day-to-day basis. Because if I have to ask a question to the board, and then the board has to go ahead and meet, and then go through their mechanics, and then ask for more information. By then, the site manager might not have been able to appropriately react in time, and things could have gotten worse. Um, so when we say how do you build a decision authority matrix in an organization, we have to consider the amount of time it takes versus the amount of time that that a business is down, and delegate down the authority to make those decisions at the most appropriate level. So I don't expect that the person doing incident response has the ability to shut off power to the entire compound, because that would be maybe decision at too low of a level, right? Because they may not understand, referring back to the question that we just were asked, the security person might not understand the business impacts of one of their turning on or turning off a particular piece of equipment. Um, so they need to have their own levels of information coming to them. But the decision, you want to delegate down the authority to the point that it's the lowest level that you can act on quickly without impacting business. And that's how you would start that that business decision authority matrix.
Yeah, and I'll just add that essentially you build a map of the business processes within your organization, and you build out what the impacts of each of those lines or facilities or wherever you want to break that down. Every business is different, but you need to break out where the critical parts of the business are and have an understanding of what the cost of that operation being down or the operation being impacted actually is. And I'll keep going back to running tabletops because tabletops lets you work through these decisions as an organization so that you're not just looking at it as a one-stop, we've built our matrix and here it is. A matrix is a living document, and it is living and needs to be practiced. In order to practice that, we found the most practical ways to do those tabletops, work through what those decisions look like, and you start identifying the gaps, and you can assign a person or a organization to those gaps and understand what those processes are. So it's only by looking at it both from an IT security as well as an OT operations lens that you really bring that together, and then you have to practice it and evolve it, and continue. It's a continuing, ongoing process, right? Because people change, processes change, equipment changes. Those are the sort of things that you want to make sure your matrix is actually, helping you make better decisions on, right? So think of it as a living, document that needs practice and refinement.
Yeah, and it always comes down to three things. That's what your matrix is always built on: your decision, your owner, and your trigger. Right?
Yep.
What's the decision? Who owns that decision? And what triggers that decision? But it's always about the decision model that the board needs to have.
All right, very good. Well, that's going to be our time for today. Terry, Chris, thank you again. This was very practical, direct, exactly the kind of clarity that organizations out there need right now. We've made available to you in this webinar a copy of our executive brief entitled The Missing Leadership Layer in Industrial Cybersecurity. This brief details how the OT vCISO strengthen cyber resilience across both IT and OT, diving deeper into exactly what Terry and Chris have presented today. You can download this on our website as well. Here's a takeaway I want everyone to leave with. The goal of cyber reporting isn't to inform the board. It's to enable a decision. Build the dashboard that matters, and we'd love to help. Thank you again for being here. You'll receive the recording shortly, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Until next time.